This episode is very kindly sponsored by our friends at Kensington Book Publishing. Thank you so much for supporting the Book Nook podcast. Hey readers, welcome back to the Book Nook, the cozy corner for readers who love to dive deep into all things books. Whether you're all about annotating your paperbacks, obsessed with audiobooks, or can't stop scrolling through Book Talk, we're here to chat about everything bookish. I'm Desiree.
And I'm Cameron.
And together we're on the community and editorial teams at Fable, the free app for finding, reading, tracking, and chatting about books.
We're so excited for today's episode because we get to chat with Venessa Vida Kelley, the author of When the Tides Held the Moon, which we'll refer to as Tides for short, releasing today. In fact, there's something really exciting taking place on Fable today. If you're interested in getting the chance to win one of 100 ebook copies of Tides, run! Don't walk to Fable to enter the giveaway book club. All you have to do is join the club, which we've linked in the description for you, and leave a comment in the kickoff. That's it, and you've automatically entered.
That's right, and it's going to be so much fun. The giveaway runs from April 29th, so today until May 6th, when winners are going to be selected at random. You'll get to read with the club and its moderator, which, by the way, it's being moderated by Brogscape Bookshelf for 1 month. You definitely do not want to miss it.
Vanessa is a Norwegian author, illustrator, and aspiring mermaid who writes fairy tales about the real world so they can draw them too. They hold a BA and MA in English Lit with concentrations in film from the University of Delaware and George Washington University, respectively, and their illustrations have supported such best-selling authors as Casey McQuiston, TJ Klune, Sarah Reese Brennan, Becky Albertalli, Jennifer Weiner, Alexis Hall, and more. But we're so excited to chat about their own beautiful book today.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Vanessa. We're so excited to talk about When the Tides Held the Moon.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So before we jump into the more book-focused author life questions, we always love hearing what our guests are currently reading or writing. So have you been reading anything interesting lately?
Yeah, I tend to have a lot of books going at the same time, but I did just finish Girls with Bad Reputations by Zio Axelrod, which was super fun, and if you're into music business type stuff, it's right up your alley. I also finished The Inheritance of Orquídea Divina by Zoraida Cordova, and that was fantastic. And right now I am reading, literally just started, Once Upon You and Me by Timothy Janowski, and I'm listening to Dreadful by Caitlin Rezakis. So far, very entertaining. I'm super excited for how these stories will develop.
That's so impressive that you can juggle that many books at once. I love that.
It's a symptom, I think, of just how all over the place I am. So if I'm in my bed and I have a hard copy, I'll be reading the hard copy. If I'm at the playground with the kids, then I'll have something on my Kindle, and that's a different book. And then when I'm driving, I've got the audiobook.
Yep.
Yeah,
love
that's
that.
true because sometimes I'll want to, obviously listen to the audiobook while I'm doing something, but I don't want to buy the book and the audiobook. So I'll get 2 separate books now. That's a great suggestion.
Divide and conquer, yeah.
And the next question we have is kind of very specific, but as a fellow writer, I'm always nosy. But what's a non-negotiable element in your writing routine?
So credit for this actually goes to one of my mentors, Nonica Ramos, who, we all get together every year at the Latinx Writers Retreat over at the Highlights campus. And they taught us how to make an ofrenda, for your writing. So you set up your little, altar, and you put it, you put, crystals or candles or whatever it is that sort of helps you focus, but then also you surround it with things that are about your book. So for my ofrenda right now has it's split halfway between stuff like a tiny little Statue of Liberty and a mermaid keychain and things like that, and then the other half is all for my graphic novel. So it's a lot of you got headphones and music producer type paraphernalia and whatnot. And so with that said, whenever I'm about to sit down and write or draw for either of those IPs, I will be lighting the candle. I'll be trying to get focused because life with two young boys is very, very chaotic. And then I find that I can like sit down and get in the zone. So gotta like tap into the ofrenda and then get to it. Non-negotiable.
That's beautiful and so interesting. I'm gonna start using that maybe.
It works because there's something about the ritual of it that just like shuts the mayhem off. And you can just like calibrate yourself for the task ahead.
Amazing.
Kind of like a mindfulness practice as you start doing it, and then by the time you're ready to start writing, you're really like in the zone. I love that. I feel like I haven't really heard that before, so it's really interesting to hear how, you know, you get into the writing zone. And on a same note, I'm curious if you have a favorite spot or ritual when you're about to read.
So, you know, as I mentioned, I tend to read all over the place.
Yeah.
But my ideal place, like if I were to just like detach from all the other obligations and stuff that I have going on, man, I like this one corner of my local library. It's just like tucked in the back. It's right next to a very warm window, and yeah, I can easily sort of get lost in a book there. But otherwise, in my bed.
Yeah, anywhere you can fit a couple chapters, that's the perfect spot.
Exactly.
And one more question, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the interview. But do you have a favorite book of all time, or I guess a book that made you want to start writing yourself?
Oh gosh. Okay, so there are a few. There's a book that there's a series rather that I have taken with me throughout my entire life, and I do rereads fairly on the regular, and it's the Anne of Green Gables series. And it's because I find that, you know, as Anne grows up and goes through like her sort of, you know, coming of age and like learning how to negotiate her own autonomy and like being a parent and a spouse and stuff like that, and even just like experiencing loss, like there's like she suffers like either a miscarriage or a stillbirth in one of the books, and it was bizarre how when it happened to me I just reached for that book and I immediately felt seen. Like it's just that series is very close to my heart. And probably got me into, like, helped get me into a headspace for writing historicals. And then the other book is The Princess Bride by William Goldman, because something about the frame story in that was really appealing to me. This idea of just like, not just a fairy tale, but the way the fairy tale plays out in like a contemporary setting, the witnesses to the fairy tale. And I feel like that also sort of like colors my writing a little bit.
So well, we'll get into all the questions about tides, which I'm so excited about. But before starting, I know I already mentioned this off camera, but I got my copy this morning, and it is so, so, so beautiful. I was just flipping through it, and I mean, I knew there were going to be illustrations, but I was just so caught off guard with how beautiful they are, and like the sprinkles of blue. Absolutely stunning, and
So happy.
it's a good opener for my first question, because I'm a huge fan of graphic novels, manga, webtoons, all of that beautiful art. And so I'm curious to hear a bit more about how, like, what was your process to implementing your illustrations in your writing, and just like that entire process when creating tides.
Oh, wow. So, you know, it's funny you should mention this because we recorded like a little mini documentary about how it all came together, because Erewhon Books has never published like an illustrated work before. So we were creating a bunch of these processes and workflows from scratch. We began with the manuscript, and when it went on submission, my agent had me provide a set of like just sketches, and hilariously it was one of those things where as I'm preparing the manuscript to go on sub, I'm getting the talk of like, it's very, very rare for a publishing company to accept the author as the illustrator. Usually they have like a pool of people that they want to select from, and so I was, sort of in the mindset of like, it'd be nice, but it probably won't happen. But then, like a week before my agent sends it out, she's like, "How fast can you pull together a bunch of sketches?" I was like, "I don't know. I guess fast." So, so I threw together as much as I could in those 7 days, like, like thumbnail, cover art, and potential scenes and concepts or whatever. I just sent it all out, and thank goodness, Erwan was like, "All right, tell us what your vision is for like the packaging of this." And I was like, "Well, if you're asking, I would love for this to be like to feel like a time capsule, like, because regardless of audience, books back then, like turn of the 20th century, they were all illustrated regardless of whether you had adult audiences or kids or what have you." So I was like, I always sort of kind of saw this as like, my old copy of Little Women, that had all the like pen and ink illustrations from 1896 and whatnot in it. So, like, miraculously, they were like, "We'll see what we can do." And from there, we had to, like, it affected every aspect of the construction of the book, down to like the way we built the contract, right? So I was hired as an artist for my own book on a separate, like, task order. And then it was like, okay, so we're going to matrix our entire production schedule so that when I'm editing, I'm not drawing. And when I'm drawing, I'm not editing, and people have an opportunity to review things as it, like, goes in and out. But I'll tell you, like, towards the end, all of that organization went out the window because Kensington, amazingly, wonderfully, was like, you know what? Let's see if we can make the dual tone print for the arcs. I had originally, like, I had slated to deliver all of that art in December, and now I had to deliver it in, like, August. So it's funny because, like, the arcs go out, and you want to tell people, like, it's really rough because I had to stop editing it to do all of these pictures. And, like, it was just, like, it was magic the way it all wound up, like, coming together. Like, my director, Cass, stayed up all night watching YouTube tutorials on how to take an illustration and break it into components that the printers could then read two different inks on. So we were having to, like, divide and conquer the final images. It was just bananas. And the fact that it came together the way it did on time, like, true testament to having a good team that collaborates well and is excited about the work,
Well, I can say that the goal of creating it as a sort of time capsule definitely came across for me. I worked as a metadata assistant while I was in university, and one of my assignments was working on Aesop's Fables. So I'm familiar with all of that, like woodcut, pictures in books. And when I first opened it, the first page that I opened was like the first page of a chapter where you have all the blue layouts, and I was like, wait, this kind of looks like Aesop's Fables. And so given that it's, a historical fantasy, it's so nice to have that bit of illustration and the color and everything. I feel like it's going to make the reading experience even more enhanced. So as a reader, I'm so glad that it all worked out.
That makes me, you have no idea how happy that makes me. Thank you.
Of course. Yeah, that's so smart because you're getting like such a dual front, like historical fantasy inside, but then the packaging of it also, it continues that feeling. So I've never seen that before, I think, for like any recent books, and just very cool, very cool. And okay, so now I guess we've talked a lot about the packaging of the book, the illustrations, but if you had to describe like the content of your book to someone who's never heard of it, how would you? Do you have like a spiel that you say? I know authors sometimes have things memorized about it.
The elevator pitch.
Yeah.
So something that probably haven't said enough about When the Tides Held the Moon, as you know, like I could say, it's a queer historical romantasy about a Puerto Rican migrant who is tasked to create this tank for a Coney Island proprietor and does not realize that it will soon house a live merman. And like that's usually the sort of like approach that I take. But something that I think I want to highlight is that there's like it's a uniquely American fairy tale. The hodgepodge of ethnicities and like sexualities, body types, the whole 9 yards. Like there's this microcosm of New York feels very much like a microcosm of our country, and the way that these people who, for better or for worse, is like ostracized from society, and how they take care of each other and survive and use the power of their community to like rise up against their own tyrant. Just feels like a super, I don't know, even like a patriotic kind of like scenario. We grow up with an idea of America as being like a land of the free, home of the brave, and this, that, and the other thing. But I really feel like what makes America America is the intention to, even when those structures fail us, or even when they are not enough, we always intend to push in that direction. So, yeah, I feel like if you've never read this book before, it's an American fairy tale, a love story set in 1911 Coney Island, and it's about, learning to love yourself and fight for the freedom of your community.
I love that.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
And I guess we've like very briefly skimmed over the next question, but would love to go a bit more in depth. And that's what sparked the flame for like your inspiration to write the story?
So, are you guys familiar with an online like fan art illustrator artist like event, I guess, called Mermay?
I think I've heard of it before, but I'm not like 100% familiar with it.
So basically, every May, like digital artists, fan artists, whatever, like if you're in illustrator circles on Instagram or elsewhere on social media, every May everybody like gets together and draws mer people.
Wow.
Because it's just, I don't even know how this began. It's just fun. It's just like it's a way to sort of like practice whimsy at least once a year. And so I guess it was back in the sort of like early stage of the pandemic that I wasn't even planning on participating, but then I had this image in my head of someone in period dress, a man in like suspenders and whatever, pressing a kiss to the glass of this large water enclosure, and a merman on the other side kissing him back. And the story just sort of fell out of the sky after that, because I was just like compelled, like, why do I have this image in my head? Why is he in period clothing? Where would there be a tank like this, and why is there a merman in it? And so I felt a little bit like I was following this trail of breadcrumbs to what the story would eventually become. But it was definitely like Like it was triggered by art first.
Wow, that's incredible. And does that sketch make it into the book at all? That original one that you made?
Um, I have I've drawn it in like full color. It is part of the array of concept art that I keep. So that specifically is not it among the illustrations that appear in the book,
Mm-hmm.
but the scene is in the book.
Amazing.
And it's I won't say much more about it, but you'll know
So,
when you get there.
and yeah, it's very, it's not common that we meet someone who's both an illustrator and an author. And your ability to combine those two passions and create something like this is very inspiring. And I guess I wonder, how has that evolution of drawing fan art or drawing illustrations for other authors to now being able to illustrate your own, how's that been like?
It's been a very it's been an interesting transition
Hmm.
because funnily enough, I've been writing as long as I've been drawing. But, unlike my illustrating, I have kept a lot of my creative writing very, very private because a lot of it is, you know, I feel very vulnerable exposing it, you know? And being a fan artist is in some ways a way of protecting myself, or had been in many ways a way of protecting myself, where I could explore themes and delve into my emotions with these avatars I was drawing. And so now drawing my own characters and writing my own characters just feels like laying your soul bare for public scrutiny. And like that's, I think, a part that I'm still figuring out how to like negotiate in my daily life, because I write and I draw for that connection with somebody else. But I am still trying to figure out how to like maneuver around the occasion where it's just like, I don't like art in books, It's like, okay. And then, also there's been this sort of like fascinating transition out of reader reviewer spaces, because being a fan artist, drawing book for other, IPs, there's a lot of Bookstagram that I have been a part of, just because, when they share a review, they'll often have my artwork next to the book, or, and we've created, communities and networks based on mutual love of a particular IP. And so I've had to, like, really like reorganize my brain a little bit and realize, like, okay, so don't get too comfortable here. Now that now that I'm an author, I'm trying to erect, certain boundaries out of respect for, the people who read my work, and out of respect for my own like sanity. So yeah, it's been interesting. But like I'm so like I will always be grateful for the years that I spent like just getting inspired by other people's wonderful imaginations. I think it gave me, more than anything, it gave me courage.
And now I'm shifting back to sort of like the content within Tides. Obviously, when you write any form of historical fiction, let alone like historical fantasy, I can only imagine how much research went into that. And so I'd love to know just like how much research did you have to conduct? How much time did it take you? What fun facts did you discover that you might be able to share with us? I would love to hear more about that.
Oh gosh, it's so funny because I didn't set out to become a like historical fiction writer. It's just sort of like fell in my lap.
Yeah.
And I think part of it or part of why I'm continuing to write in this genre is because of the subject matter experts that I worked with for Tides. So I was doing all of the research during lockdown, which meant that I couldn't travel. Like this was back when people were being told, like, you got to stay inside, like don't cross state lines or whatever. And here I am in the DC area writing about, granted I grew up in New York, but it's been a while. So I reached out to a number of museums who I figured would be, at the very least willing to like talk with me a little bit about whatever they knew about the time period, but also maybe like point me in the direction of certain resources and whatnot. So of the museums that I reached out to, there was the Tenement Museum. They have like 2 restored tenements on Orchard Street in Manhattan, and in particular their focus is on like the immigrant history of New York. Then there was David Sharp's from the Waterfront Museum, so everything that takes place in Red Hook, Brooklyn, the sort of like factory culture there, and the just like the layout of the docks and things like that. Like he gave me a stack of all of these photographs that I could then use as reference photography for when I was drawing, like the opening end papers, right? And then there was Adam Rinn, who is the current art director of the Coney Island Circus Sideshow. He is a sword swallower. And he spent like a couple hours with me talking about the trials and tribulations of sideshow history, and why it was so attractive to people who, for whatever reason, if they had physical disabilities, if they were marginalized in other ways, like if they were LGBTQ, et cetera, why the sideshow became like a shelter, a refuge for these people who at that time, if they didn't have that kind of community, were often put in jail or institutionalized or killed. So the phrase "with it, for it, never against it" is not something I made up. It is something that Adam told me. He's like, if you include nothing else about us in this book, include "with it, for it, never against it," because it is the family, the sideshow family that we would die for, that we would, do anything to protect. And I was like, Roger that. And then of course, Puerto Rico and New York have a very like connected history, and I was put in contact via the Tenement Museum with Virginia Sanchez Carroll, who is the Professor Emerita of Puerto Rican Studies at the City University of New York in Brooklyn. She also consulted on Steven Spielberg's West Side Story remake, and she was just like amazing. All of these people were so amazing and so generous, and I feel like, subject matter experts are just generous in that way. They are passionate about the things that they know, and they're excited when other people want to know it. So they sent me like, get this book, check out this, whatever. And so between their guidance and long nights literally combing through like scans of the New York Times and various other publications from the early 1900s, the research and the story sort of like came from opposite ends to finally like, coincide, if that makes any sense. Like,
Yeah.
they kind of evolved together.
Yeah, as a born and raised New Yorker, I feel my heart is warming at this story. And I remember actually going to the Tenement Museum with my grandpa, and because they had immigrated from Italy to New York, and yeah, he looked at this and he was like basically crying. He said, this was what it was. Like he was just very taken back because of that museum. So,
That's
um,
amazing.
yeah. And speaking of personal truths, despite this being a historical fantasy, there are personal truths and like a lot of yourself in these characters. Is there, I mean, we kind of talked about it before, but is there something you want people to take away from this story? Just besides the, the fantasy of it, I guess.
Um, I feel like the the biggest message of the book is something that the character Matthias, the strong man, says to Benny multiple times, and it's ain't no being free on the outside if you ain't free on the inside. And there's a subtle message in there about, decolonizing your mind. We get, I think, caught up a lot in the expectations that society imposes on us. And, especially for those of us who are LGBTQ, or we're on the spectrum, or, whatever, fill in the blank, the impulse to feel shame and to suppress who we really are and to, comply with things that are, essentially unfair or unjust. In order to truly be free, that begins with rewiring what's in here and dismantling those walls that we subconsciously build around our hearts to protect ourselves. And so, Benny learns over the course of the book to be fearless by interacting with these people who, even though, 1911, like, they are not mainstream, like, accepted for who they are, they themselves do a pretty good job existing in the world in authenticity. Like, like, there are little vignette scenes that Benny has with each of the sideshow members, and each one just sort of like chips away at that, facade. And of course, no one does that more effectively for Benny than Rio, right? So, yeah, just learning to love yourself is probably the first thing you need to do before you can really, like, rise up and be free outside.
So beautiful. I have chills, and I feel like laughing.
It's a beautiful message, and I can't wait to just jump into the story and see all of the other feelings that it's going to make me feel.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
of course. And before we wrap up, I know that you mentioned the graphic novel that you're working on, which is releasing next year, and I would love to hear a bit more about it. I know I mentioned it earlier. I'm a huge graphic novels fan, like this entire bookshelf. This is my collection. So I'd love to
Amazing.
hear more about the story, the actual process of publishing a graphic novel. I feel like most discussions often turn around the publication of novels. So I'm curious to hear about graphic novels.
Oh gosh. So, all right. So the book that I am actually working on now, and which I will return to as soon as we're done talking, is it's called Manu Faces the Music, and it is not a historical, but it is another New York urban fantasy. It's a sapphic sort of with like rom-com elements story about a highly decorated music producer who discovers that the reason why she has all these Grammys is because she is like a spiritual lightning rod. She's a super medium, and her third eye was closed when she was a child in order to essentially keep her from being wielded as a weapon. And as a rash of arson spreads throughout the boroughs, she returns to Puerto Rico and is essentially told the truth about who she is and what she's capable of. And oh, by the way, you need to reopen your third eye. And so she does so. And her journey is very much like, you know, it's kind of like the Peter Parker, with great power comes great responsibility. And, how do you negotiate between the comfort of the American dream, right? Of being affluent and successful or whatever, and also uplifting the barrio that raised you. So, when it comes to the development process for this, everything is very, very different. There's no like standard procedure for writing a graphic novel, so everybody has their own sort of like language that they pursue to create one. I wind up doing mine not unlike a movie script, where I've got script and blocking and treatment notes all happening on an actual document, but then also layouts and thumbnails happening concurrently if they're in the margins or if they're in like my sketchbook or what have you. And so I'm working with Shannon Waters is my editor, who is one of the originators of the Lumberjanes series, and she's been so fantastic about like turning off my imposter syndrome, because there's no sort of standard way of doing things. I'm constantly being like, do you understand this? Am I doing this right? And she's always like, relax, Venessa, this is great. So we've finished the layouts, which is basically like, layouts can look like anything. They can be stick figures, and all is basically like, it shows you the pagination, like the page turn, the way the panels are arranged across the page. And once you finish that, you can do the pencils. So the pencils is the phase that I'm working on right now. And now I'm getting into the detail work, like what's the facial expression, in this panel, or, what is the environment in this panel. And so this is probably the most labor-intensive part of the process for me, because once I finish these, hopefully by this summer, I'll print it all out, and I can hand ink everything and then colorize it. Thank the heavens I don't have to do any lettering, because that's like my least favorite thing to do. I'm like, oh God, someone needs to help me with my handwriting to, make it readable. But yeah, then, after that, it, goes to print. And like what I will say is, the production value of the graphic novel that I'm working on is not too different from the production value of When the Tides Held the Moon, because even the paper quality, and I don't know if you felt it with your own copy, but we had to seek special paper to be able to handle the inks that we were applying to it, so that it wouldn't be like, what happens when paper gets wet, it gets wrinkly and weird and stuff like that. So like, so both Tides and Manu Faces the Music are rather expensive, like, packages to develop, and but thank goodness there are publishing companies out there willing to do it, right?
No, that's so interesting. I mean, obviously it's just like common sense how much work goes into just drawing all of those different pages, but it's so interesting to hear about like the actual stages in the process. So I'm very excited to read that one too. And I definitely saw it with Tides when I was flipping through it earlier. The paper feels really nice. It just has a really nice feel to the book, and it just adds to like the entire package. So I'm glad that that worked out in the end. But thank you for telling us about this new graphic novel, and this brings us to the end of it. So I just want to thank you so much for taking the time, for telling us about all of your, your journey as an illustrator, a writer, publishing this book, and the new stories that are coming soon. And just want to confirm for our listeners here where they can find you on social media.
I guess the easiest place to find me on social media is my Instagram, which is the Kelley Art. There's an extra E in that Kelley, which which haunts me everywhere. But I have that same handle on Tumblr. If you want to find me on Threads, I'm there under that handle as well. And then if you are curious about my TikTok, I'm V to the Kelley there.
Amazing. Thank you.
We're definitely going to check those out. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and follow us on @GetFable on TikTok or @Fable on Instagram for more bookish content. Venessa, thank you so much. This has truly been an incredible discussion, and I feel like I learned a lot about the process of publishing, like a graphic novel, but also just generally publishing. It's been great.
Oh, thank you guys so much. I had so much fun chatting with you, and I appreciate all of your enthusiasm for the book.
Of course. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our listeners. We'll catch you next time on the Book Nook.